So now, I've been promising it all show, the most important story of the day, okay, and the story that the media will largely ignore. Yesterday, the Associated Press reported that Medicare will become insolvent in 2026. Okay, it is currently 2018. That means in 8 years, Medicare will not be able to pay for itself. It's not able to pay for itself right now. It's already running in the red. Social Security is going to follow in 2034. So within 15 years, we are going to see Social Security essentially go bankrupt. Now, it's a government program, which means it can't go bankrupt. It means instead they're going to have to radically raise taxes or radically reduce benefits. Medicare and Social Security, along with Medicaid, do represent a majority of the federal budget every year. So when you hear about, oh, we're spending so much money, it's waste, fraud, and abuse. It's all waste, fraud, and abuse. This was Trump's line. It was also the line of the left during the last administration that, you know, the way to cut spending was to look at waste, fraud, and abuse. But we can never restructure our key entitlement programs. Those are what are driving our debt. Those are what are driving our deficit. Medicare and Social Security, as with Medicaid, represent a majority of the federal budget every year, and they are mandatory spending. Okay, that means you can't change them unless you actively go and change the law. Even in a government shutdown, people get their Social Security checks. And Social Security has been running a negative cash flow for years. If we were actually to take into account the amount of unfunded liability we have in Medicare and Social Security, some estimates say that our national debt is not $20 trillion, it is $90 trillion. 90. Because we are not taxing to the necessary to pay for all of this stuff. My grandmother was paying like $50 into Social Security 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Now she's taking out thousands of dollars. That's not because they invested in the stock market. That's because they're taxing me thousands of dollars for my grandmother. Now, if I want to help out grandma, that's my responsibility. But it shouldn't be my responsibility to help out your grandma. One of the things that Social Security has done is that it has shifted the burden of responsibility from individuals and families to the government. There's actually been a net negative. It's meant that people feel less necessity to take care of their parents. They figure the government is going to do it. And really, the government isn't doing it because the government doesn't have its own money supply. The government is just taxing my kids in order to pay for their great-grandmother, and not just their great-grandmother, somebody else's great-grandmother as well. The original ratio with regard to Social Security, like the number of people who are taking out of Social Security compared to the number of people paying in, it was like one person's Social Security taxes were paying for 12 to 15 people. Today, it is 2. Your Social Security taxes are paying for 2 people. Soon it will be 1. Soon it will be a direct monetary transfer from my kids to old people, to old baby boomers, who, by the way, are the wealthiest cohort in the United States. As you get older, you get richer. So you are taxing people who are poor to pay for people who are rich. It is actually a regressive policy. As you get older, you have more money, you have more assets, you have a house, you've been earning for 50 years. And yet the idea is you're going to tax people who are not yet born in order to pay for all of this. And yet politicians of both parties are unwilling to look this right in the face. Right? The only politician who really talks about entitlement reform over the last several decades has been Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, but he's basically been shellacked for it. Donald Trump ran promising not to touch entitlements, and so he has not. Republicans are in control right now. If they do nothing about entitlements, that is a giant fail on the part of Republicans because we're going to feel the brunt of this. And then it will come down to Democrats saying, do you want to raise taxes? And Republicans saying, do you want to cut benefits? The estimate is that if we do not actually raise taxes dramatically, then when the Social Security fund goes insolvent, when Medicare goes insolvent, you're going to have to cut benefits by 20%. My feeling to that is, okay, well, I guess that's the way it's going to have to be. Because I don't see why my kids should be put behind the economic 8 ball so that my parents won't have to get as much money out of Social Security. I don't see why that should be. I'll pay for my parents. That's my responsibility. And my parents will pay for themselves. That's their responsibility. So again, there are a few solutions here. We could increase the payroll tax right now from whatever it is, 11.7% to something like 14 or 15%, or we'll have to cut cost of living adjustments, or we might have to confiscate cash from people. You know, people who paid into Social Security, but they're more wealthy, they just won't get anything out of Social Security. Or we could raise the retirement age, which is really what we ought to do, right? We ought to raise the retirement age because the reality is that retirement, I don't think, is actually particularly good for people. And retiring at 65 made sense in an era when the average age of death was 63. It doesn't make a lot of sense in a day when the average age of death in the United States is now over 80 for women and just about 80 for men. That's 15 years Social Security is supposed to pay for you. Delaying retirement and moving the retirement age up seems like it would make more sense than all this, but we're not going to focus on any of these problems. We're just going to fight useless, stupid culture wars because that's what we do now, right? That's what we are more involved with. But this is what we should be paying attention to. If the government was designed for anything, is to solve problems exactly like this, and yet because of the gridlock in our system, which is usually a good thing, in this case it's a bad thing, it means that we're probably going to do nothing, kick the can down the road until that can ends up exploding in our face.